This is the Initiates Podcast. Here, we create space to explore the path of initiation as we reawaken the forgotten wisdom that resides within us all. I am your host and guide, Natalie Grace. Join me every Thursday for an enlightening exploration of contemporary spirituality. It's my honour to journey with you. Welcome, friends, to the Initiates Podcast. I'm Natalie, and I'm so excited to be with you today because today I'm going to be talking about something very dear to my heart, soul sovereignty. When it came time to sit down after the excitement of the first episode and think about the first topic that I wanted to cover, I thought the best place to start with would be my values. And if you listen to episode 1, you would have heard me speak about my values and the things that I care a lot about and make space for in my life. So I kind of sat with the question, what do I value the most? And when I ask myself that question, I always get a very clear response, and it's sovereignty. Sovereignty is something that I value very deeply in my life, and I really do believe that others are starting to also care more about their individual sovereignty after the recent collective experience that we've all been through, where whether we agree with it or not, whether it was good or bad for us, individual sovereignties have been disrespected to an extent. And it's something that we're starting to wake up to a little bit more. What is sovereignty? Who holds it? What authority do I have in my own life? So I wanted to share with you today my feelings and thoughts about sovereignty. What is sovereignty? We're going to explore the concept of sovereignty at the 3 different levels of God, of the individual, and of the state. And then I'm going to do a bit of a deep dive into soul sovereignty and what it means to be soul sovereign from my perspective and my experience. So thanks again for joining me. Let's journey. To me, sovereignty is being the ultimate authority in your own life. To be sovereign is to be free. But this goes beyond feelings of freedom, which can be fleeting. This is really the embodiment of the freedom gained by being the highest authority in your own life and in your own reality. To not feel pressured by external expectations of how you should be living, how you should behave, what you should buy, what you should talk about, how you spend your time. It's about being in control of your own experience, and it's about being the master of your own reality. And so to be soul sovereign is to lead as the authority in your own existence, in alignment with your soul's desires, your soul mission, your deeper self. Sovereignty is the ability to enact your free will without outside interference, to live as you desire without outside forces telling you that it's not allowed or societal pressures telling you that it's not acceptable. And what is free will? So free will is the spirit that drives us to take action. It's free because we're born with it. It's a universal law. Every human is born with free will. Free will holds incredible power. On the one hand, it can lead to some terrible behaviors like greed and theft and murder and rape. In that case, it's generally agreed that community standards, laws, and rules are necessary to maintain peace and order within a society of humans with free will. However, when put to good use, free will creates emancipation. People achieve incredible things using their free will. Society evolves because of the free will of individuals, and those willing to explore, to push boundaries, to question, to discover, play such a big part in helping to drive humanity forward. But if we're born with free will, and free will is so powerful, how can it be controlled? Well, that's where the concept of sovereignty comes in. While sovereignty on one level describes the individual's authority to use their free will, on higher levels, sovereignty describes the authority of the state or monarchy to rule over the collective. As individuals, we've traded our sole sovereignty for social comforts, and this is what I'd like to explore: the meaning of sovereignty from a social and political context, and how we're willing participants in the surrender of our own sovereignty, of our power, because understanding this is key to taking our sole sovereignty back. Now, on an individual level, there is a bit of a movement known as sovereign citizenry or self-sovereignty that describes people who are actively living outside of those systems of control, that are rejecting those external sources of authority and instead deferring to their own inner authority. But that's a bit more of like a political movement rather than a, say, spiritual movement a lot of the time. And I'll discuss sovereign citizens in a bit more detail a little bit later. But as I would describe it, soul sovereignty is something different to that. Soul sovereignty is enacting your will in alignment with your soul's truth, with your soul's desires, with your soul's mission, and really in reverence to that aspect of you that is a fragment of the highest authority. And so your soul's truth, your soul's desires, your soul's mission, they're always going to be in alignment with the highest truth. So if you value soul sovereignty, it's a little bit different than valuing just individual sovereignty, because individual sovereignty can excuse all kinds of terrible behaviors. It can excuse harm being done to others. Soul sovereignty keeps you in alignment with the greatest good. So it's an important distinction to make between sovereignty of the individual and on a societal, a political level, and soul sovereignty, which is much more spiritual. So if you look at Wikipedia and you look up sovereignty, the first line says that sovereignty is the defining authority within an individual consciousness, social construct, or territory. And that was probably one of the best official definitions that I came across, because it covers those three levels of sovereignty. It covers the individual, it covers God, and it covers the state. And when I say state, I mean the government, the monarchy, whatever the ruling power is that has authority over the greater populace. And so in a general sense, if we're talking about sovereignty and the meaning of sovereignty, in addition to connotations of freedom and using your free will at that individual level, you've also got the political and social definitions of sovereignty. The sovereign is often used to describe the monarch, the king or the queen, or the emperor. And sovereign as a word has a really interesting origin, which I'll talk about in a little bit. If you are religious, sovereign can also mean God. This is referred to a lot in the Bible, that God holds sovereignty over man, that God is the ultimate sovereign power in this realm. And Christianity is not the only religion that talks about this. Pretty much all religions place their God or gods at a position of authority over man. And when I say man, I'm also including women in there. I'm not triggered by that term personally, so I'm sorry if you are, but you know what I'm talking about, especially when we're talking about historical and biblical context here. And as a side note, the subjects of language and spelling, what it is to cast spells with words, is a topic that I'm going to be talking about in the future, so stay tuned for that. But back to sovereignty. So in our modern day understanding of sovereignty, sovereignty mostly relates to independence of a state or a nation. A sovereign nation holds independence in terms of international relations. Sovereignty infers autonomy. So a sovereign nation has the right to protect its borders, for instance, against foreign threat. It gives a nation the right to impose its own laws and to enter into engagement or deals with other sovereign nations. So there's incredible power, obviously, held in a state sovereignty. And because the concept of sovereignty has such a layered meaning and that it's also evolved so significantly over time, I think it's important now to take a little look at the history of sovereignty and how this concept has evolved over time to impact us in such a phenomenal way. Sovereignty is not given, it is taken. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. So historically, if we go back to ancient Rome, this is where the concept of the sovereign power was first observed. So ancient Rome existed between the 8th century BC and the 5th AD, and it was a famous Roman juror named Ulpian who recorded the existence of sovereignty in the society of ancient Rome, and he observed that the people had transferred their individual powers over to the emperor, and that while the emperor decided on the laws of the empire, he was not bound by those laws himself. And so in that sense, the empire held sovereignty over its people in ancient Rome. So while the English term sovereign or sovereignty had not arrived yet, in ancient Rome, there was a Latin word that meant the same thing. And it's very funny to think about. This word is super annus, made up of the terms super, which means supreme, and annus, which is over. So it's kind of like the supreme over power. It's something having supremacy over something else. And in this case, when we're talking about the superannus being a ruler, the empirical ruler, we're talking about the supreme chief or the supreme ruler. So then we enter medieval Europe, which happened around the 5th to 15th centuries. And medieval Europe emerged out of the fall of Rome. And it was very interesting. This time in history did not exhibit the same form of sovereign rule as ancient Rome did. They had a feudalist system. And that meant that much of the power, while they still had the monarch in charge, much of the power was shared between the monarch and the aristocracy who were in charge of ruling over the serf class. So it wasn't the same kind of supreme or ultimate rule. The aristocracy held a lot of power here. And that lasted until the European Reformation happened, which was around the 16th century, late 16th century in France, when the concept of sovereignty or sovereign rule re-emerged. And this was alongside the emergence of the nation state. So it emerged as a political tool, I guess. Jean Bourdin, who was a French political philosopher and jurist, at the time created the theory of sovereignty. In a sense, you could call him the father of sovereignty as a political concept. And he created this concept, or kind of like formalized it, in reaction to the power held by the nobility, by the aristocracy up until that point. He favoured a ruling structure that he described as absolute and perpetual sovereignty. And so in his model, sovereignty described the monarch, the king or the queen, as the absolute ruler over the people, and that his rule must be perpetual. That is, the rulership could not be transferred to others in parliament or to anyone in the judiciary, and it could not be subject to term limits. There was some rules that the sovereign needed to follow in his model. The sovereign will be bound by the constitutional laws of the nation that dictate sovereign succession and also the limitations of sovereign power. So the constitution did have, at this point, it started to have perhaps higher power than the actual human ruler. Interestingly, Baudin also proposed that while the sovereign was not subject to positive laws, which is the term that describes laws passed by humans, the sovereign was bound by the divine and natural laws, which describe the laws of God, the laws of reason, the laws of nature. And so the sovereign in this model did answer to a higher power. So who is the ultimate ruler then? Is it the state? Is it the monarch? Or is it God? Enter the divine right of kings. The divine right of kings is a Christian doctrine that states that all kings are preordained to rule by God. This doctrine is specifically Christian. However, the concept that a ruler sits between God and man and was preordained to hold that position isn't actually unique to Christianity. It existed in much earlier times in Zoroastrianism, which was a pre-Christian religion, and also in the imperial cult of ancient Rome. And so I talked about that earlier, the emperor holding supreme rulership over the people, and this is how that was justified. A similar doctrine called the Mandate of Heaven also existed in China. The doctrine of the divine right of kings was used politically as a tool to justify existence of absolute monarchy. The doctrine has a deeply metaphysical basis that before birth, all monarchs are preordained by God to inherit the crown. The assertion is that the soul is preordained by God, not the man. So God is selecting the soul before they're born to inherit the role of the monarch, of the king, of the supreme ruling sovereign. And that the monarch, the soul of the monarch, has fully surrendered their consciousness to God while incarnated here as ruler. So in other words, the doctrine says that God himself has divinely designed the succession of the monarchy, the full line of succession, handpicking the souls and gifting these souls the divine right to rule over their populace, with God himself the only power above. The other thing that's worth noting about the divine right of kings is that it states that the monarch is not accountable to any earthly authority and is not subject to the will of the people, of the aristocracy, or of any other estate of the realm, such as the clergy. And so hearing this, right, I'm a spiritual person, you're all spiritual people. This actually sounds like it could be beautiful. This could be a beautiful arrangement between God and humanity, that whether you believe that God is a man in the clouds who has ultimate authority over man, or that God is source energy and we're all from that source energy and fragments in a mirror of that source energy, regardless of what you believe, this could be a cool concept that God, source, is up above, selecting the purest of souls to lead the masses through our evolution. But if we know our history, we know that the divine right wasn't always used for the highest good of all people. And because the monarch, by this divine right, is not accountable to any man, the divine right has been abused across history by rulers to justify all manner of actions. invasions, massacres, genocides, you name it. The other thing that's interesting is the divine right states that any attempt to depose or restrict the monarch's powers goes against God's will and is therefore a crime of sacrilege. And this explains why monarchs throughout history have been so fond of public executions, because any attempt to jeopardize their rulership was ultimately a crime against God, and therefore torture and execution could be very easily justified as an appropriate punishment. It was also a great deterrent to those watching to not attempt to restrict the monarch's powers in any way. So when we're talking about why, from a historical context, we so easily gave up our sovereignty, in the past, we were very religious people, abiding by God's laws, and this divine right of kings doctrine was essentially used against us by religion and by the empire. Now, this all began to change during the Age of Enlightenment, which happened around the 17th, 18th century in Europe. And this is when sovereignty, the concept of sovereignty and its role in society began to shift. To this date, sovereign rulership was established by the succession of monarchy and the absolute rule of the monarchy over its people. However, the Age of Enlightenment heralded a scientific revolution, and rational thought started to replace metaphysical traditions. Monarchies were overturned at this time and replaced with constitutional governments. And as the church and state separated, the divine rule lost its power, and the sovereign rulership evolved to encompass the state. So it was no longer one man with the God-given right to rule over the people. It was a state, another entity becoming the sovereign ruler. So with the public no longer buying into the idea that the ruler held a metaphysical power above their own, something else needed to take the place of the divine right. And so the social contract was created to enforce the power of the state in the form of a government. And this social contract is still pivotal in our modern day democracies in maintaining the sovereign authority of the government over the people. So let's talk a bit about the social contract, because this is also really fundamental in understanding how sovereignty works. The social contract describes the agreement between state and citizen, whereby the individual has given their consent to surrender specific freedoms in exchange for the safety and comforts offered by the state. So this consent can be explicit. So say entering into an agreement with social security or taxation systems. Or it can be implicit, such as the expectation of an individual citizen that they'll be protected by state security apparatus like the police or the defence force. Another implicit expectation is that the state will permit the remaining freedoms that haven't been given up, that sometimes are even protected by the Constitution as part of an explicit contract. These include things like freedom of expression, religious freedom, and freedom of movement. So ultimately, the goal of the social contract is to maintain the social order, to maintain a society where citizens are happy and willing to surrender their full sovereignty in exchange for what we describe as a good quality of life. And this allows the state to rule without chaos and also without any threat to their power. It creates compliant, obedient citizens. And this all works well when quality of life is high. Most people are happy to do what they're told. However, when quality of life starts slipping, or when the states begin to impinge on those remaining freedoms, like we've, say, experienced in recent years, or perhaps we've seen in the riots against the government, say, in Sri Lanka recently, as a collective, we all start to question the social contract and the authority of the state. And this leads me to where we're at now in the current day and what I see as the erosion of the sovereignty of the state and the reclaiming of the sole sovereignty of the individual. And so I recited a quote earlier from Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who proclaimed that sovereignty is not given, it is taken. And when we're talking about soul sovereignty, when we feel like we don't have it, the only option is to take it back. And this is a concept that we're quite familiar with in Australia, where our Indigenous people were colonised, their country stolen by a monarch using the divine right of kings to justify their actions in growing their empire. And there's a common saying here that sovereignty was never ceded. And this is a really powerful message. It's something that is said in solidarity across racial lines here, across ancestry. It's a proclamation that the Indigenous people of Australia still hold their soul sovereignty. And that's such a big topic that it's not really my intention to get into it here. But I just wanted to say that these sayings about taking back sovereignty, of acknowledging that sovereignty has been stolen from big groups of people, and that we should start thinking about taking it back, is starting to become a common thing that people say, that people talk about. We also saw a lot of discussion around sovereignty of individual freedoms being impinged on during the past few years, again, especially in Australia, especially in the state that I live in, where those implicit freedoms that we're used to having as part of the social contract, freedom of movement, for instance, freedom to see our families, we were told were no longer allowed. And the trade-off was that we'd be kept safe. And because the government lies a lot about a lot of things, many people didn't trust that that was a real deal. And I understand where that comes from. And so mentioning this is just to kind of paint the picture that we're starting, as we awaken more, we're starting to understand more about our own soul sovereignty, our yearning to be free, our yearning to have authority over ourselves, to not be told what to do all the time, whether it's a boss, whether it's the government, whether it's the police, whether it's some queen that we don't even see. And going back to that quote, sovereignty is not given, it is taken. If we've had our sovereignty taken from us, well, it's really our job to take it back. There's a specific group of people who've created a whole movement around this. They are the sovereign citizens, who come at it from a political perspective where it's an individualistic movement. And sovereign citizens don't believe that the state or its apparatus, like the government or police or bureaucratic agencies, hold any authority over them. They believe that the free will of the individual overrides the authority of the state because free will is a God-given right of all humans, and only God can overrule that. So from a political perspective, sovereign citizens believe in individual choice. And if the individual chooses not to pay taxes or car registration or sign a birth certificate or even use their legal name, appear in court, then that's their right. And who is the government or some paper pusher at Vic Roads, or as you guys say in America, the DVA, to tell them that they must do that? And a lot of people have issues with sovereign citizens. They don't respect the fact that these people disrespect laws that other people have to abide by. They feel like it's probably a bad thing for society that whole cohorts of people are deciding not to pay taxes because that kind of keeps the whole social fabric running. But at the same time, I think it's very brave to question authority and to seek another way of living that feels more true, more authentic, more real. And if you haven't come across this movement yourself, one of the most fun things to do, at least in my opinion, is to watch the videos of the sovereign citizens getting pulled over by highway police, because they often don't drive with number plates and have signs up on their cars that talk about them being free sovereign citizens and that they don't answer to any authority under God, and that it is their right to travel freely on a road. And it's very interesting because a lot of the time these videos sometimes go for an hour, but almost always the police either give up because they know they can't kind of win the argument, because often this person that's arguing with the police is very well versed in particular areas of law that the police often don't know about and don't know how to respond. And they're usually told to stop wasting their time if they call in some kind of superior. But I just find it really funny and entertaining to watch like videos of authority figures being tested in that way. I find it amusing. So if that sounds interesting to you, go and have a watch because it's pretty funny. So I just wanted to give a moment to the sovereign citizens. In many respects, the sovereign citizens are kind of showing us less brave souls what's possible, that it is possible to question authority, that it's possible to question laws, it's possible even to live outside those laws, but in our society there are consequences. And you don't have to go as far as being or identifying as a sovereign citizen or a sovereign individual to detach from systems of control. And we can call that governmental laws, or we could call that the matrix, right? Because so many of these controls are actually narratives that are fed to us that we just believe in without questioning. And we're programmed with these narratives at such an early age. You know, we're sent off to school in our early childhood where we're taught to be obedient, where we're taught to limit our imagination, where we're taught the values of society, which are really about money and status, aren't they? And that those things can't be attained unless you're a good, obedient citizen. And so school's really training us to give up our sovereignty, to surrender our sovereignty to the state. And it's so unfortunate how willing we are to do that. But on the other hand, I think for almost everyone on this planet, there's probably a karmic mission of some sort to reclaim your soul sovereignty, to break through the controls, the mind controls of the state, of the matrix, and step into your own soul power. So if you're wanting to reclaim your soul sovereignty, it's really time to start questioning what controls you in your life. And this is something that I've spent lots of time myself thinking about and working through and processing. In my own journey, I have felt completely out of control in recent years in regards to my health, my physical health, my mental health. I have felt completely burnt out. So like there was a big imbalance in how I was spending my time. I felt like I was giving so much of myself to external systems of control. And so for me, these were obviously my job. That took a huge toll on me. I'd go through phases of working really, really hard, burning myself out completely, and then needing a lot of time off, which actually worked really well for me. And I'll talk about that on a future episode about the concept of cultivating space and how important that is. But so the job was one part of it, but it wasn't just work. It was also how I was expending my vitality, my passion, my fire. I willingly volunteered so much of my life force to political discourse, to complaining about politics, to fueling the machine, really. I let it drain my life force, and looking back, I'm not sure why, because it's very clear now to see that no matter how much energy I put into this, what I thought was a righteous fight against the system, I never really got anything out of it. It just drained me to the point where I realized that it didn't serve me and my energy was better spent elsewhere. So it was a good lesson to learn, but it took me a while. So when it came time to embark on a healing journey to deal with my physical health issues, a healing journey that would then take me to the deeper layers of the source of the physical illness, the emotional layers, the mental layers, the spiritual layers, those more energetic layers. I found that I felt out of control, but what was within my control, where my attention was being spent, what I was giving my energy to. So detaching from that machine of political discourse was the first step for me, really, in reclaiming my sovereignty. I got a lot more time back, and I got to maintain more of my vitality, my passion, my life force energy, my fire. For me, I got to keep that for me. At that time, my health didn't really allow me to work. So that was the next thing that I had to detach from. And it wasn't just the money that I needed to detach from. It was also the identity attachment. I no longer got to say if I wasn't working when someone asked me, what do I do? That knee-jerk response, well, I do my job title. I no longer got to say I was some fancy consultant anymore. And at this point, I was already working for myself. So even that was too much for me to handle at that point. Because of my physical health issues, I couldn't give any more of myself to the job that I was doing and to external demands for my energy, for my time, for my creativity, for my brain power, all of those things. At that time, they felt like such a finite resource for me that I could no longer, for however long it needed to be, give those away to someone else to use for their own benefit. I really wanted to take those things back and keep them for me. Yet I still felt out of control. And this journey was so important, going within to actually assess which areas of my life I felt out of control in and how that was impacting me. And then looking at what was within my control that I could change to help me feel more free, help me feel more confident, help me feel more in control of my reality, more like the master or the author of my reality, rather than just a participant, someone being forced to participate with no choice. So where that shadow work took me, in going deep into myself and really analysing where it was that I felt like I lacked freedom, where I felt like I wasn't the authority, where I was outsourcing my authority to other sources, it led me to taking responsibility for my life. And that's such an important part of claiming your soul sovereignty. If this is something that you want for your soul to be free, for you to feel free, for you to feel in control, for you to be the ultimate authority, you need to be ready to let go of the role of the victim. And in this imbalanced power dynamic that we exist in, where we've got so many rulers and we've also got this matrix that we live in, which is really intense mental programming, the victim role is one of the only places where we find some power. But that in itself is such a huge psyop. There really is no power in victimhood. So you need to be willing to accept that bit and give up the feelings that you have attached to being able to complain about all the different ways the system is taking advantage of you. Complaining about work, complaining about bills, complaining about you're not having enough time in the day, you know. You need to be willing, that is to use your free will to stop caring about those narratives anymore, those narratives that want you to be constantly complaining about how unfair life is, in favor of reclaiming your power and your freedom. So that's the most important first step. You are not going to be able to reclaim your sovereignty, to live in your power, to be the authority in your own life, as long as you're complaining about other people being in control of you. So once you've got past that step, really then you have to look at the areas in your life where you feel out of control, where you feel like you have no authority, that someone else is running the show. You need to really assess those and start making some plans to change. Whatever you actually do have control in, like this process is seeing where, you know what, I feel out of control in this area of my life, but actually if I make some changes, I'll be able to reclaim a lot of control. You know, work is such a big part of our lives, and so many of us are unhappy in our jobs, are unhappy with how much time we spend at work, are unhappy with the things we're asked to do at work, are unhappy with the level of compensation or praise or value we receive back from the people and the entity, the company, the corporation that we give our life force to. So yeah, it's time now to look at what makes you feel trapped or feel controlled. So is it work? Is it societal expectations? Is it family expectations? Is it overwhelming responsibilities? What are the areas of your life where you feel constrained? Is it time? Is it your energy? Is it your physical health? Is it your emotional balance? Is it your mental health? Is it money? Is it your ability to move? Is it people? Now, some of these things, when you're looking at them, we can't change everything, okay? Soul sovereignty is not about dismissing your most sacred responsibilities so that you can have ultimate freedom every second of your life. It's not about that. We really do need to honor the responsibilities that are meaningful in our lives, even if they sometimes make you feel less free than you would otherwise. So things like parenthood or caring for your pets or animals, these are things, even responsibilities you have to employees if you're a manager, you can't be a dick about it. Soul sovereignty is not only being in alignment with your authenticity, but being in alignment with the highest good. So you still want to honor your responsibilities, your sacred responsibilities, but that doesn't mean you can't look at all your responsibilities and really assess whether they're all necessary, where they come from, how they serve you. And then on the flip side, think about what makes you feel free, what makes you feel happy, what makes you feel fulfilled, what makes you feel contentment, what makes you feel joy. What are the feelings that you want to feel that you don't think that you feel like you're being held back from feeling right now? There's a lot of feeling there. You want to prioritize these feelings to be able to obtain these feelings as often as possible. And so it's your job to prioritize those things in your life. This is part of taking responsibility and ending you willingly giving up your control to other forces. And the only kind of payoff we get is that we can complain about it all the time. It's up to you to prioritize what you want to feel and to create a life where you can feel these things as often as possible. You need to place them above the things that make you feel constrained or controlled. It's so important. This is key. So I'm going to take you through some examples, right? So if you hate your job, but you have a responsibility to your children or, say, pets in your care to keep them fed and clothed and happy, I'm not telling you to quit your job, even if it makes you miserable. You've got a sacred responsibility there. But what I'm suggesting is that you find ways to cultivate the feelings of freedom in that job. Look at every avenue. If it's about time, you want more time, this job's taking too much of your time, can you reduce your hours? If you're not feeling fulfilled enough in your role or compensated well enough, can you change roles somehow so that you can do some juicier work, or you might get better pay? If it's the people around you that are draining your life force, can you change teams so that you're surrounded by better energy perhaps? If you just don't like the energy of the place, I've definitely had that before. I've been in some workplaces that felt like they were built on burial grounds. They just had such heavy energy. Is it possible to change sites or work from home more so that you're closer to home or you're in a more comfortable location? And you know what? It's possible that in your job, maybe you can't do any of those things, but at least if you've gone through the process of assessing all of those things that are important to you, and it turns out that you can't change much in the job that you're in, then it's up to you to make a plan to change jobs or change careers, whatever it takes, because you don't deserve to feel trapped. You don't deserve to feel controlled. You are a free, sovereign being. You are a beautiful soul who deserves to feel free, more freedom than you feel right now. And so if you feel trapped in this sense because of your work, you are the only one that can free yourself. This really sucks, but we really have to understand this. In the world that we live in this capitalist system, the company doesn't care about you. The company only cares about money. They act like the company is a person, but it's not. It's a legal entity. It has more rights than people. And if that fact, whether you understand it on a conscious or it's just a subconscious level, if that fact is affecting your health, your vitality, your mental and emotional wellness, you are responsible for doing something about that. Whatever is within your power to change, it's up to you to do that, because no one else will do it for you. So that's another part of that self-responsibility. If you're wanting to reclaim your sovereignty, your soul sovereignty, you're the only one who can do that, because the whole problem is that we've outsourced our authority to someone else and they're not wanting us to have any power. They're not going to give us more power. They're going to give us less power. So if reclaiming your position of authority in your life, or claiming it for the first time, because to many of us it's incredibly foreign, you're the only one who can do that. And so in my life, I've detached from a lot, honestly. It's been a slow process over many years now, detaching from society's expectations around what I should be doing in a particular age in my life. I've gotten to the point now where I'm like, wow, I'm probably a little bit immature actually, because I didn't care at all about lots of responsibilities that lots of people do care about. I'm okay with that. But, having some self-awareness is good, right? So carving out space, I talked about space on episode 1, has been so important for me. Really detaching from all those mental controls so that I had space in my thought realm to explore who I am, how I want to live, what I care about, what I truly value. To be able to hook into my intuition, that's a big one. When you are soul sovereign, your authority comes from within you, and that's usually your gut feeling, your intuition, your inner knowing. That is the voice of authority. That becomes the voice of authority in your life. So soul sovereignty really allows you to restore your authority and connect more deeply with your own inner knowing, inner wisdom, and intuition. And you become more aware of your boundaries. Having strong boundaries is a really important part of soul sovereignty because you know what is right for you. You know what you're willing to accept and what you're not willing to accept. You know what you're willing to give away and what you're definitely not willing to give away when that comes to your time, when that comes to energy, when that comes to your creativity, when that comes to all those important factors that make you you, that make you unique, that make you special. You become much more aware of how you want to share those parts of yourself, who you want to share them with, and when you want to share them. And also what you expect in return for sharing those. Sometimes it's nothing. Other times it's more transactional. And you have the confidence because you are so strong in your boundaries to enforce them, which is something I think we all struggle with actually. Another incredible benefit of reclaiming your soul sovereignty is that it really does help you to feel like less of a victim. You feel in power and in control because there's no inner conflict anymore. You're able to have more of a sense of ease and sense of flow because you are no longer in conflict. The biggest benefit really is that you no longer feel like you're trading off your soul. That whole saying of selling our soul, that's really what the social contract is. We've sold our souls to feel safe and secure. It's also the fact that we've lost pretty much all sense of self-reliance, self-sustainability, that we depend on the state for everything, the state and the matrix. We've forgotten how to take care of ourselves. And so that's another really important part of reclaiming your soul sovereignty. It's taking back responsibility of looking after yourself. And depending on how far you want to take that, that can be providing your own food supply. That can be providing your children with your own education. That can be living off grid so you don't feel controlled by power prices, for instance, something that a lot of us are feeling crushed by at the moment. Or it could be starting your own business and working for yourself, managing your own schedule. Or it could be trusting yourself more deeply when it comes to your own health and wellness, that you are going to have stronger boundaries and more fierce communication in advocating for yourself, that you're going to believe yourself and your intuition about your body and your health over the medical establishment who don't know what it is to live in your body. Only you know that. There's so many ways you can take this, but it all really depends on what's in alignment for you. What makes you feel free? What makes you feel happy? What makes you feel like you have the highest authority in your life? So if soul sovereignty is something that you feel called to cultivate for yourself, I encourage you to think about all of those things and to think about how you feel controlled by the system, the power structure, the matrix, or however you want to describe it. Think about those things and think about ways that you can free yourself. Think about what you can take back responsibility for in your life, what you can let go of complaining about, and what you can change in order to create a longer lasting state of freedom and satisfaction and fulfillment and contentment in your life. On that note, I'd like to thank you for joining me today for this deep dive into sovereignty. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, drop a rating or a review if you feel called to do that. I would be so very appreciative. It will really help this podcast gain traction. If you enjoy my vibe and would like to show your support, you can work with me one-on-one. I offer 2 different types of soul readings where I work with the tarot and the Akashic records to deliver you messages from your higher self and spirit team to help you navigate how best to come into alignment with your sacred mission and your highest path. So if that sounds like something you would like to explore with me, check the show notes. All the links are there for you, or head on over to theinitiatespodcast.com. Until next week, peace.